What level of participation is expected from the undocumented community, taking into account the fear that exists in that community, which is an objective fear?
There are two aspects to that. On the one hand, things are going to get worse for everybody except those who are the beneficiaries of the part of the ruling class, and and in particular the fascist section of the ruling class that's in ascendancy now. For broad masses of people, let me put it that way, not for everybody, but for broad masses of people, things are going to get worse unless there's struggle ways to first of all, to force this regime out of power, through, as I talked about, through massive, nonviolent, but sustained mobilization of growing thousands and ultimately millions of people. If that doesn't happen, things are going to get worse for broad sections of society, very broad section of society. So everybody, has a stake and an interest in fighting against this, including the undocumented. In other words, on the one hand, this is one aspect, and I'll speak to the other in a minute. On the one hand, as much as things have been made more difficult, if people are intimidated out of getting involved because the stakes and the risks and the price, if you want to put it that way, for doing so have gone up, then that's going to weaken the struggle that needs to be waged. On the other hand, you do have to look at the particularities of what different sections of society are facing, and then there is a particular focus on the undocumented, which is not just, by the way, on the part of this fascist regime, is not just against the undocumented, it's against the unwhite. And this is a big part of what's happening here. Laura Ingraham and this Tucker Carlson, these fascist commentators on Fox News, did us the favor of more or less openly articulating this, saying the America that we knew and loved, i.e. white, Christian America as they see it, is no more, and they're very freaked out about the prospect, of the country becoming majority non-white, and in particular, that's a big part of that is immigrants coming from, as Trump put it, shithole countries, Haiti, Latin America, Caribbean countries, African countries, and so on and so forth, rather than from good, pure Nordic countries like Norway or something. And not that I have anything against people in Norway, but just the point is that was what he wants. People, good white people from places like Norway, educated, good white people. So the thing against the undocumented is just the spearhead of an attack around this whole thing, which, the biggest change in the demographics, the population, proportions in the country is coming from immigrants particularly from Latin America, though not only there. And so, this is a spearhead of an attack against all that. This is why Trump, when he started his campaign, at the very start, ran out this thing about the Mexicans. They're not sending us their best people. They're sending us the rapists and the drug dealers. And they seized on this incident in San Francisco where some woman was killed by a illegal immigrant or something like that. I think the guy was actually acquitted, if I remember correctly. But nevertheless, that didn't matter to them. So this is what's going on here, and there is a particular attack on the undocumented. That's true. But it has to be seen also in a larger context. And there have been positive responses. There was outpouring. Remember when the travel ban first came out, there was like mass demonstrations at the airports, somewhat spontaneously, somewhat organized. When the thing about separating the children from their parents at the border came, people mobilized around that. So there have been, but look, if we're going to get to a better world, people have to fight against every significant manifestation of oppression. It's not. We got to get out of this, view that this narrow view that like people in silos. That's the word I was looking for. Silos. If it's happening to me or people I care about, then it's happening. If it's happening to somebody else, then it's really not really happening, or I don't really care. We have to break out of that, and people have to become fighters against every significant manifestation of oppression. And with regard to the undocumented, people have to recognize, yes, undocumented people cannot be beaten into submission around this, cannot be intimidated from struggling, but mainly, frankly, the burden of fighting against this should be taken on by others, you know, because they are in that difficult position. So this is what we have to fight for. We have to fight for people to see that, you know, it's possible to have a completely different world where all this is not part of what people are living. You know, we could just abolish this stuff, but we can't do it if people are just narrowly going to look at, you know, at themselves and a narrow circle of people that they immediately care about, and that's all that matters. That's the way, you know, that's the road to disaster on the one hand, and on the other hand, you know, by fighting against every manifestation of oppression, you also broaden out your own outlook. And you also learn about people that you haven't before that come into contact with. You learn from them, you learn from their culture, you know, you engage with them and vice versa, and we get a much richer process going of struggling against this system. So just to, you know, to summarize it briefly then, one aspect is that the undocumented have to come out and struggle. They can't go into hiding because it's not going to deal with the problem, and it's going to make the struggle weaker. But the other aspect, which is overall even more important, I will say, is that people who are not undocumented have to take this on as their own struggle, because we're not going to get to a different and better world if everybody is only concerned about what's immediately happening to them. And there is an impulse in people, because people have been exposed to the ideas of justice versus injustice and so on. There is an impulse in people to want to fight against these things, and we've seen that. That was the point about many people do care about many, and some care about, more than a few care about all of those 5 stops. There is sentiments there which has to be, you know, further developed and brought forward as even more massive struggle, and in the short term it has to be ultimately, or not so ultimately, but it has to be overall directed toward actually driving out this regime. And then even more fundamentally than that, we have to take, those who have come to see the need for revolution, have to take up all that as part of building toward that revolution.